says share screen. No. Pause, breakout, chapter, security, share screen. Okay. I think I'm sharing the screen now. The idea is as follows. We're going to look at the sources right away. And what the sources teach us, and all year long, this is an important issue, but especially leading up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but all year long, you have to do the right thing. Ladun LeChaf Zchut, it says in Chazal teach us that one should always judge other Jews favorably. It's usually possible to interpret people's acts in a good way or a bad way if it's possible to understand that what they're doing is has a good basis to it. You should judge them favorably. Let's see what the sources say, and we'll let the sources speak for themselves. We begin with the Gemara. And I'm not going to bother to mention exactly where I draw the sources from, because you have that exactly on the screen. This is from Tractate Shabbos, and you have the page number and so forth and so on. If you want to look it up, you can check the context, and you can see what my typing errors are. I'm not a great typist. In any event, what the Gemara says, Amar Reish Lakish, the great Tana, teaches us in the Gemara, HaChoshed b'ksherim, someone who suspects a kosher Jew of doing something wrong, someone who falsely suspects a Jew of doing something wrong. You really didn't do anything wrong, but you suspect him or her of having done something wrong. Loka begufo, you're going to get a punishment in your body. You're going to get a corporal punishment. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will punish you for having improperly suspected your fellow Jew of doing something wrong. You get a corporal, it says in the verse, Hey lo yaminuli, Moshe Rabbeinu, speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Moshe Rabbeinu said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how can you send me to the Jewish people in Egypt? How can you send me to be their redeemer? They're not going to believe in me. They're not going to have any trust in me. Who am I? I can't even speak very well. All right, Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't speak well. Moshe Rabbeinu was choshed, suspected. He was suspicious. He thought the Jewish people would not trust him. But Kadosh Baruch Hu knew that the Jewish people were trustful. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew that the Jewish people would trust Moshe Rabbeinu and would believe in him. Well, Moshe Rabbeinu suspected that the people wouldn't trust him, and that was an improper suspicion. Amar lo, he said to him, Hein ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Moshe Rabbeinu, not only are the Jewish people trustful, not only are they believers, they are the descendants of believers. But you, Moshe Rabbeinu, you suspect improperly that they're not going to believe in you, they're not going to trust you. You're going to end up not having any faith. You're going to end up not having any trust. You're going to end up without any belief yourself. Hen ma'amidim, how do we know that the Jewish people are trustful? It says in a pasuk, Ya'amenam, the people have faith, the people have trust. B'nei ma'aminim, how do we know that the Jewish people are descendants of believers? The believers, descendants of believers, because the Avos, Min Bashem, the Avos, Avram, Yitzhak, Yaakov, it says flat out in the verse that they too believed in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They too had trust in God. Ata isof chalahamim, but you, Moshe Rabbeinu, because you're lacking faith in the Jewish people, in the end, you're going to lose your faith. You're going to lose your trust in God. Ya'an lo he'amantam bi. And in the story of the water from the rock, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to point out that, going to remind Moshe, you see, you don't have trust in me, Moshe Rabbeinu, because you, Moshe Rabbeinu, didn't have trust in the Jewish people. Mamai Deloka, how do we know that you're going to get a corporal punishment for failure to trust other Jews? Vayomer Hashem lo od have yadcha bechekacha v'yaveh becheka v'yatzir v'hinei yado mitzuras b'shalik. Moshe Rabbeinu was instructed by Kodesh Baruch Hu to put his hand into his cloak, take his hand out again. His hand turned white. His hand became leprous. That was his physical punishment for not having faith, not having trust, not having belief in his bottom line. The Gemara emphasizes that you have to have trust in your fellow Jews, and it's really very bad if you suspect them of doing something wrong. Let's look at two more passages from Chazal in order to round out the picture. Another Talmudic passage says, Hu poresh, hu bocher. The background to the story is like this. In the days leading up to Yom Kippur, Yom Kippur is just so chock full of special Kedusha. I mean, there's just there's so many elements of special Kedusha on Yom Kippur. It would take an awful long time to go through all of them. But one of the many special elements of Kedusha on Yom Kippur is that all of the avoda, all of the service in the Beis HaMikdash was done by the Kohen Gadol himself. No assistants, no ordinary Kohanim were allowed to participate. Everything had to be done by the Kohen Hagadol himself. And indeed, in the days leading up to Yom Kippur, the Kohen Hagadol, the high priest, who normally did not do the daily service, normally ordinary Kohanim did it, and the days leading up to Yom Kippur, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, would practice under the supervision of the rabbis, would practice doing everything to make sure that when Yom Kippur came, he'd be able to do everything correctly. Now, if you know anything about the history of the Second Temple period, if you know anything about the history of Bayis Sheni, you know that there was a big conflict back in those days between us, the rabbinic Jews, following the rabbinic tradition, going back to Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah Shebaal Peh, against the Tzadukim, the Jews who rejected the rabbinic tradition and followed only the written law. That was a big conflict back in those days. Maybe it still is today, but we're not going to talk about modern history in today's class. But there's a big difference in how to perform the service in the Beis HaMikdash. Big difference. Whether you follow only the verses in the Torah, or whether you accept the tradition of Torah Shebaal Peh and do things the way it says in the Mishnah and Gemara. And therefore, there was a lot of conflict on many, many issues between the Tzadukim and us, the rabbinic Jews. One of the differences had to do with how to perform the avoda in the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Kippur. And the rabbis were afraid. The rabbis suspected, the rabbis of the Sanhedrin suspected that the Kohen Hagadol, he might be a secret tzadduki. He might be one of those Jews who rejects Torah Shebaal Peh. And therefore, on the morning before Yom Kippur, the Sanhedrin would send a delegation of 3 great rabbis to the Kohen Gadol And the three great rabbis would impose an oath upon the Kohen Gadol. The three great rabbis would say to the high priest, Ishi Kohen Gadol, Anu Shluchei Bet Din, we, three rabbis, are representing the Sanhedrin, Ve'ata Shlucheinu, and you are hereby appointed as our shliach, our representative, when you do all the avoda on Yom HaKippurim, beginning tomorrow morning. And they imposed an oath upon him that he had to swear that he would do things like the rabbis of the Sanhedrin required, not like the Tzadukim said. Before I continue the story, let me add a footnote, a linguistic footnote. In my previous Gilgul, I was a linguist, and therefore I'm always interested in the linguistic aspects of the text. Let me repeat one key linguistic phrase. The rabbis of the Sanhedrin said to the Kohen Gadol, Anu shluchei bet din, we represent the Sanhedrin, Va'ata ishi Kohen Gadol, my Lord chief priest, head of the priests, my Lord chief priest, you are going to be our shliach. You are going to be our representative, doing the avodah the way we want you to. You notice in passing that the rabbis addressed the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, with the word ata, you, ata. Ishi Kohen Gadol, Ishi meant my lord back in those days. My lord, the high priest, ata, you are going to be our shliach, our agent. Now, this is very unlike other languages. If you think of French, Spanish, Russian, Old English. We don't have this anymore in contemporary English, but there were different ways of addressing honored people as opposed to close friends. In French, for example, a close friend you would address as toi, you. But an honored person, you would never say toi, you, to a honored person. You would have to use an honorable word, vous. And you have to know when to address people as vous, when to address people as toi. Both mean you, but only one of them is used for close friends or within the family or for children. The other is used for as a term of respect. Many English used to distinguish between thou within the family for close friends and children, as opposed to ye, which was used when addressing the Lord. Well, English no longer has this ye and thou business, but we used to. In any event, we learn from Chazal that in Hebrew, it is correct to address the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, with ata. There is, in Hebrew, no special term of respect, which is any different from the word used for close friends within the family. Exactly the same terminology is used when addressing very honorable people in Hebrew. All Jews, as far as that is concerned, have the same status. In modern Israeli Hebrew, there's, of course, a very strong influence of Yiddish, Russian, and all the languages that the Jews spoke before they came to Eretz Yisrael. And in those languages, the Jews were accustomed to honorary expressions, and therefore you hear children address their teacher in Israel, or ordinary Jews address the rabbi in Hebrew, not with ata, but with who or he. Ma hamore amar. One would not say ma ata amarta. You speak to the Rav similarly in the third person, being more respectful. All this is modern Hebrew based on the languages the Jews spoke before they came to Eretz Israel. In Rabbinic Hebrew, ata is perfectly acceptable for the most honorable of people. So that's the end of the linguistic footnote. Bottom line, the rabbis of the Sanhedrin suspected that maybe the Kohen Gadol was going to do the avoda on Yom Kippur in the improper way because maybe he's a tzadduki. Well, they made him take an oath to do things the correct way. Then, hu poresh, after taking the oath, the high priest would step aside, bocha, and he would cry. Shechashtu tzaduki, he would cry because they suspected him of being a tzadduki. Hem porshim ubochim, the three rabbis would then step aside and they too would cry. Dama Reb Yoshua ben Levi, because Reb Yoshua taught us, kol hachoshed b'ksherim loka b'gufo, the rabbis were afraid that they now do a punishment because they were probably suspecting a kosher Jew, the high priest, was going to do something wrong. Well, you see from this that it's very important to judge other Jews favorably. One more source in Chazal. In the Midrash, it's Reb Yoshua ben Levi. The same Reb Yoshua says, in the name of his father, Kol hachoshed chavero b'davar she'ein bo loka b'gufo. Anyone who suspects his fellow Jew of doing something wrong, and it's a false suspicion, really, the other Jew is a kosher Jew, well, you're going to get a physical punishment for that. Okay, these are the sources in Chazal. And notice in passing that all of the sources emphasize that the punishment comes if you're choshed b'kesherim, if you have suspicion against someone who is really kosher. If the other guy is really wicked and you suspect him of wickedness and he really is wicked or she really is wicked, well, no punishment for that because your suspicion turned out to be valid. But if your suspicion turns out to be invalid, that's where you get the punishment. Now, if you think about it for a moment, this is all very nice. This is all lovey-dovey, but this can get you into a lot of trouble. After all, everyone in the course of his lifetime, everyone in the course of her lifetime meets a lot of suspicious people. And someone says, can I borrow some money? It's someone that I suspect is not going to pay back. I suspect that he or she is going to abscond with the money. Well, am I commanded to cancel my suspicions and trust that person and lend money to anyone who asks for it? Is that what Chazal meant? I have suspicions that so and so is going to treat the children very badly. If he's a teacher in the primary school, or she, does that mean I have to suppress my suspicions and hire that person anyway as a teacher for the children? The demands of this idea in Chazal can surely get you into a lot of serious trouble. Well, let's see how the Rishonim, how the later commentaries, the great Rishonim, the great medieval authorities, and they will come presently to the modern authorities as well. Let's see how they understand what's going on here. We begin with Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah was from the Golden Age in Spain. He was from the Beis Midrash of the Ramban. but he was one of the most influential poskim in Spain in the Middle Ages, in the golden period of Spain. And not only was he one of the most influential poskim there, he also wrote a number of Musar books inculcating the most important ideas of proper midot, proper life, how to live life properly. Well, this is from one of his svarim. He says, Al tachshod chavecha ki shema kasher hu b'davar. You should never suspect your friend of doing something wrong. Maybe he's entirely kosher. If you know definitively that someone is wicked, well, that's not a suspicion you have. You know it as a fact. But if you don't know definitively as a fact that someone is wicked, you should trust that person and have faith in that person. Choshed b'ksher bloka b'gufo. Well, we learn from Chazal that if you're guilty of suspecting someone unjustifiably, you're going to get punished. Now, at this point, we're going to look at the other side of the coin. Up till now, we've been looking at the sources according to which you must always grant trust to anyone and everyone unless you know definitively that that person is wicked. Now we're going to look at things from the other point of view. The information here is from Masechet Derech Eretz. Now, the Masechet Derech Eretz is the tractate we're going to quote from is not one of the standard tractates of the Gemara. There are a number of smaller tractates which are not in the standard canon. These smaller tractates were put together in the historical period shortly after the close of the Talmud, when the Talmud was finally edited and published. When I say published, back in those days, you're not thinking about printing, right? Publishing in those days means issued to the public or in oral or written form, handwritten form. That ended the formation of the Talmud. Then began the Gaonic period, the period of the Gaonim in Babylonia. When the Gemara was finished and sealed, the great yeshivas of Babylonia did not close shop. They continued operating for centuries and centuries. The Rosh Yeshiva there were called Gaonim. And those Gaonim, shortly after the close of the Gemara, began assembling a series of shorter tractates containing precious material from the days of the Mishnah and Gemara, precious material which for one reason or another did not find its way into the Gemara. The Gemara is not the total corpus of what the great rabbis in the Mishnaic and Talmudic period had to teach us. Many of the traditions were not included in the Gemara. Those traditions were transmitted to the Gaonim. The Gaonim redeemed them, put them together in a series of smaller tractates. Well, one of them is called Derech Eretz. That's what we're going to quote from. It's printed in the back of every standard edition of the Talmud, but it's not one of the standard tractates. Let's see what it says. There's a story about Rabbi Yoshua. Someone came to visit Rabbi Yoshua one morning, early one morning. A visitor came. A passerby came and said hello to Rabbi Yoshua. Natan lo achil l'shtia. Rabbi Yoshua was very generous. He gave that person food and drink. He fed this traveler who came to his house early one morning.
Mm-hmm.
When the time came to go to sleep, when the time came to go to sleep, don't know. When the time came to go to sleep, back in those days, it was very hot in the Near East, and therefore in the summer, people usually slept on the roof. And so when it came time to go to sleep, he prepared a place on the roof for this visitor to sleep. The person went up onto the roof and went to sleep. Natal sulam betachtav. And Rebbe Yoshua, after the guest climbed up the ladder to go onto the roof, Rebbe Yoshua took the ladder away. Now the guest is stuck up on the roof. What did that visitor do? Amad bechatzi halayla. In the middle of the night, that visitor woke up, natal et hakelim, and stole the silver utensils of Rabbi Yoshua. Rachan betalito, wrapped up the silver utensils in his cloak. And then what happened? And then what happened after he wrapped them up? Kevan shebikesh lered, when he wanted to go down from the roof, he stuck his foot down, thinking his foot was going to hit the top rung of the ladder. There was no ladder. Nafal min agag, and the guest fell. The thief, he's now a thief, fell from the roof. Nishbara mifrakta, and he broke his backbone. And he broke his bones. The shacharit in the morning. Kishkim Reb Yeshua woke up. He came. Mitzah Okashu Nofel, saw him on the ground where he fell from the roof. Amarlo. Reb Yeshua said to the thief, Reka, empty-minded fool. You're an empty-minded fool. This is what you do. You steal from me my silver utensils. Amalum. The thief said to him, Rebbe, I didn't realize you were going to take the ladder away. Why did you take the ladder away? I fell and broke my back. Amalum. Rabbi Yeshua said to him, Reka, empty-minded fool. Didn't you realize that I was suspicious of you yesterday when you first came to visit? Didn't you realize that I suspected you all the time of being a thief? This is why Rabbi Yeshua said, Le'olam yihiyu kol b'nei adam be'einecha kalistim. Everyone always seem to you to be a thief. You should distrust everyone, always. You should always suspect everyone of being a thief. Still, you honor them, you respect them, you give them a good meal when they're traveling, you give them a good mattress to sleep on at night. You machabit them. As a human being, you have to give him honor. You have to give her honor. You suspect that he or she is a thief, but you treat the person honorably and respectfully, even though you're thinking in your mind, even though you're thinking in your heart, he's probably going to try to steal from me. And of course, you take precautions, take the ladder away, and you take whatever precautions are necessary in order to protect yourself, in order to protect your family. Well, now here we see diametrically opposed opinion. Up till this point, all the sources were teaching us that you have to trust everyone. And if you make a mistake and distrust someone who is really faithful, you're going to get a punishment. Now, the source is saying exactly the opposite. It's the only correct way to proceed is to be suspicious of everyone all the time. Of course, you treat the person with kavod. Of course, you treat the person with respect, but in your heart, you have in mind, maybe this person is going to try to rob me, and I'm going to take precautions in order to prevent that. Well, given these two diametrically opposed opinions by the great rabbis of the Talmudic period, Mishnah and Talmud, the question then arises, which shall we follow? Which is the opinion embraced by the great poskim? And, well, this turns out not to be a simple question. Let's see what the sources have to say. The Noda Yehuda, his name was Rav Yecheskel Landau. He was the great Rav of Prague in the 18th century. Now, but back in his days, one of the big issues that arose as far as the laws of Shabbat are concerned, one of the big issues that arose was the question of using an umbrella. Umbrellas first came into common use in the 18th century. People didn't have, ordinary people, most people didn't have umbrellas before the 18th century. It came into use at that time.
He goes to
Are you allowed to use an umbrella on Shabbos? This is a question which came to the rabbis in the 18th century in the days of Noda Yehuda. This is what Noda Yehuda wrote. Adkan dibarnu me'isur tikunei Shabbos. He has a long tshuva, and after a long tshuva, proving that there is no prohibition on Shabbos, after a long tshuva, analyzing the issue top to bottom, left to right, inside, outside, after a long tshuva, analyzing the issue of umbrellas, he comes to the conclusion, as far as the laws of Shabbos are concerned, there's no prohibition in carrying an umbrella outside the house if you're in a place with an eruv. If there's an eruv which permits carrying outside the house, there's no halachic issue, no halachic prohibition in carrying an umbrella. Aval, im ha'midam erev Shabbos. But there is a prohibition in opening an umbrella. Opening an umbrella is creating a roof, and that's the prohibition of building. And therefore, you cannot open an umbrella on Shabbos, but if it was opened before Shabbos, if before Shabbos you open the umbrella and leave it open in your house, then there's no particular prohibition in carrying the umbrella through the public domain, assuming you live in a town which has an eruv. So therefore, as far as halacha is concerned, you can carry the umbrella outside the house if you opened it before Shabbos to protect your head from the sun or the rain. You can use an umbrella for ordinary use. The only reason we prohibit it is because people will suspect you of having opened up the umbrella on Shabbos. That's mar'it ayin. That's the appearance of sin. You didn't do anything wrong. You opened the umbrella before Shabbat. But if people see you carrying it in the public domain, they will suspect you of having opened it on Shabbat, and you'll be causing the people to suspect you when really you did nothing wrong. and therefore you should refrain from carrying the umbrella in the public domain so that the people will not be guilty of suspecting you when really you did nothing wrong. That's the approach of the Noda B'Yehuda, and indeed, that is the approach which is the overwhelming opinion of modern poskim. This is the majority view, by far, the majority view of contemporary poskim. But, as you know, from all of my classes, from all of my shiurim, there's always another opinion. There's always another way of looking at things, which always deserves consideration. His name was Rabbi Lifshitz, 19th century Germany. As in all of my classes, I bring you only the most important, weighty sources, as interesting as the opinion of many obscure rabbis might be. We're going to skip them in my classes. I bring you only the most important. Rabbi Lifshitz in the Tiferes Yisrael, 19th century, he writes as follows. Klal gadol amru chachamenu. The rabbis teach us an important rule. Have dan kol adam l'kaf zchus. You have to judge everyone favorably. If you see someone carrying an umbrella in the public domain on Shabbos, in a place with a Eruv, you should say to yourself, oh, he or she surely opened it up before Shabbos and is therefore guilty of nothing. You should have faith, you should have trust, you should believe that the person is doing everything correctly. And therefore, we are forced to the conclusion, even in cases where all indications are that the person did something wrong, not proven definitively, but the indications are that someone did something wrong, well, if there are strong indications that someone did something wrong, it's correct. It's correct to suspect that person. But the Regenschirm is the old Yiddish or German word for an umbrella. Ispe Arbeletusa. There are 4 reasons why you should think that carrying an umbrella in the public domain is acceptable within the Eruv. These are the 4 reasons. 1, the worst violation which can take place here is creating a roof over your head on Shabbos, and that's only a rabbinic violation on Shabbos. In order to be guilty of the Torah violation of building on Shabbos, just a roof by itself is not enough. You need also the walls. If it's only the roof, like an umbrella, then that's only a rabbinic fence around the law. You shouldn't come close to building. V'gam l'sha'ava, v'gam ein bo chochacha sha'asu b'isu. There's no proof that you have no proof that he or she opened the umbrella on Shabbos. Maybe the Jew did not open the umbrella himself or herself on Shabbos. Maybe a non-Jew opened it, which was actually the common practice in Frankfurt. Before the Holocaust, Frankfurt had a glorious Torah observant community before the Nazi period. The community founded by Reb Shlomo Carlebach and in the 19th century, and absolutely magnificent Torah observant community there. And there was an Eruv around the whole town in Frankfurt before the Nazi period. And it was the common practice on rainy days, what everyone did on rainy days in Frankfurt, what the Torah observant Jews did, was before Shabbat, when rain was predicted. Before Shabbat, they would all open their umbrellas at home, leave their umbrellas open in a corner at home. Then they would walk out of a house carrying the open umbrella and go to the shul, go to the synagogue. Upon entering the synagogue, the Jew would hand the open umbrella to the non-Jewish usher who was employed to take care of the umbrellas. The non-Jewish usher would then close the umbrella, store it away, and after the davening, when the Jew would leave the synagogue, the non-Jewish usher would take that person's umbrella, fetch it for storage. The non-Jew would open the umbrella, hand it to the Jew, who would then walk home through the rain with the open umbrella. That's the way it was commonly done. The umbrella was opened and closed by the non-Jew. And since it's quite possible, when you see someone walking through the public domain with an umbrella open, since it's quite possible that that person had a non-Jew open or close the umbrella for him or for her, well, you should not suspect that the Jew did anything wrong. You should believe that it was done correctly. A non-Jew did it for the person. Since there's so many reasons, so many ways to explain how everything was done correctly, there's no reason why you should suspect a person carrying an umbrella that he or she opened it on Shabbat, and therefore all is well. LeChaf go Noda Yehuda. I disagree with the Noda Yehuda on the top of the screen. The Oser, the Gamal Noda Yehuda at the top of the screen says, even if you have a non-Jew open the umbrella for you, people will be choshed, will suspect you. No, they shouldn't suspect you. Therefore, if the umbrella was opened before Shabbat, but was stuck in a corner of your house, open, you're allowed to carry it in the public domain within the Eruv on Shabbos. So even though today the vast majority of rabbis are following the opinion of the Noda Yehuda and prohibiting carrying an umbrella outside the house on Shabbos, even when there's an Eruv, even though that's the opinion of the vast majority of rabbis, this other opinion also exists. And therefore, in my holy neighborhood, which is wall-to-wall Haredim, if on Shabbat, it's unlikely this would happen. My neighborhood is so frum. But if I would see someone in my neighborhood, surely not a neighbor, they wouldn't dare, but a visitor in my neighborhood carrying an umbrella on Shabbat, well, I should not be choshed. I should not suspect that anything bad happened here, that anything in violation of Torah occurred. I should have trust that everything was done correctly. The umbrella was surely opened before Shabbos, and since it's an Eruv, no problem at all. So the Acharonim have a machloket. Majority view on the strict side, minority view on the lenient side. Now, in general, someone who asks advice, someone who calls up the rabbi and says, Rabbi, is it okay for me to carry an umbrella outside the house on Shabbat? So someone who asks for advice under normal circumstances, if there's nothing unusual in the case, it's usually good advice to advise people to follow the majority of poskim, especially in a case like this, where it's a very large majority. The reason why it's wise to advise people wise, not absolutely required, but wise to advise people to follow the majority. And the reason is explained by Rav Kook very simply. It's a svara, a simple idea that truth, correctness, proper understanding of the Torah is usually going to be found with the majority. You get together a group of wise people. Not talking about people off the street. We're talking about well-educated, fully qualified poskim. You get together a group of wise and fully qualified people. They disagree. They disagree about this. They disagree about that. Well, wisdom is generally, usually, to be found with the majority. That's not quite the same as saying that the majority is always right. Of course, it's possible for the majority to be wrong, and therefore, although it is in general wise to advise people to follow the majority view, because that's where wisdom is in general to be found, in unusual cases, it might indeed make sense to advise someone to follow a minority opinion. And if someone did not ask for advice, who am I to stick my nose into someone's business if he or she did not ask for my involvement? If someone did not ask for advice and of his own volition, of her own volition, has decided to follow the minority view, I can smile. I can smile on that. I might not do it myself, might not advise others to do it if they would ask me, but elu ve'elu, divrei Elokim Chaim, the minority view is also an acceptable view, and we are prohibited from being choshed b'ksherim. We are prohibited from thinking that someone like that is doing something wrong. Okay, up to this point, we understand the tension that exists among the poskim, and we have an approach to understanding which view to follow. Now, let's add to this one important point of understanding, namely the Rambam. Rambam, when he formulates these ideas, and he speaks about these ideas twice, once in his Sefer HaMitzvot, which he wrote as a young man, and then again in the Mishnah Torah, which he wrote as a mature scholar. And not surprisingly, the two sources agree with each other. They're both Rambam. He says, Ra'ui ladun et chavero LeChaf zchus. It is proper, it is seemly, it is correct to judge others favorably. And I underline the word ra'ui. It is correct, it is proper, it is fitting, it is seemly to judge others favorably. That's not exactly the same as saying you are obligated to do that. Hebrew, rabbinic Hebrew, has a very rich vocabulary to express obligations. Mitzvah, chiyuv, tzarich, mechuyav, muchrach. I mean, the Hebrew vocabulary goes on and on in words describing what you are required to do. Rambam uses no such word. When he speaks about judging others favorably, he says, Ra'ui. It's correct, it's proper, it is fitting, it is seemly, it is advisable, it is commendable, all kinds of good things to judge others favorably, but there's some distance between that and saying that it is required. Lo yifaresh ma'asav udvarav ela l'tov v'chesed. It is ra'ui. It is advisable to judge everyone favorably whenever possible. That's what he wrote when he was a young man. As a mature scholar, he wrote, Talmud Hacham, a rabbinic scholar, Makdim Shalom L'chol Adam, greets everyone before being greeted. As the Talmud Chacham rushes to honor people. The Talmud Chacham rushes to greet people even before they have an opportunity to greet him. The reason is that the Talmud Chacham must do everything possible so that he will get along well with the people, and therefore must honor everyone and honorably greet everyone he meets. V'dan kol adam LeChaf Zchut, the Talmud Chacham must always judge everyone favorably. That is a requirement for someone who has risen on the scale of Musar, someone who has risen on the scale of spirituality to the level of being a Talmud Chacham. This is not an ordinary Jew we're talking about. This is someone who has already achieved a high level of spirituality. That on that level of spirituality, you must judge everyone favorably. It's quite clear from the Rambam that the entire issue of judging others favorably, the entire issue beginning to end, is a high level of spirituality, and therefore wise, therefore commendable, therefore advisable, therefore all kinds of good things, but not exactly required. Someone who fails to judge other Jews favorably is not actually guilty of any sin, and therefore has no need to do tshuva, no need to repent, because nothing actually went wrong here. Now, of course, the question arises whether or not this view is embraced by later poskim. Well, the Shulchan Aruch, and I quote the Choshen Mishpat section of the Shulchan Aruch, there's surely no more definitive sefer in halacha than the Shulchan Aruch. Ein l'dayan l'rachem bedin aladal. Poor person comes before the judge, comes before the Bet Din, the rabbinic court. It's prohibited for the courts to have mercy on the poor person. Shlo yamam, not allowed to say, Ani who's baldino ashir. The court is not allowed to say, this plaintiff is poor. The defendant is rich. Let's decide in favor of the poor person, so the poor person will have a livelihood. That's not justice. Justice has no room for such mercy. Just as the Bet Din is prohibited from having mercy on the poor person, similarly, the Bet Din is prohibited from specially honoring the rich person. If a rich, wealthy person comes before the court and the other litigant is a poor, ordinary person, the court is not allowed to do anything which extends special honor to the rich person, because that will adversely affect the outcome of the case. Lo yomar heach achayvenu bedin v'nimtza mizbayish. The Bet Din is not allowed to say, how can we find the rich person guilty? He'll be embarrassed. It'll make his life more difficult. Well, just as you cannot have mercy on the poor, similarly, the court cannot have mercy on the rich. You have to judge justly. If two litigants come before the court, one is a tzaddik, the other rasha, one a tzaddik, the other evil. Two litigants come before the court. Lo yomar, the judges should not say, this guy is evil. He's probably lying to us. The tzaddik, we have to believe everything he says. Oh, no. You have to treat both litigants equally. You cannot conclude, the court is not allowed to conclude that the wicked litigant is probably lying and therefore we're going to decide the case against him. Ela le'olam yehiyu shnei baalei din beinav kirashayim. Rather, the Bet Din must consider, the Bet Din must view, the Bet Din must relate to both litigants as being wicked. The court must think that both litigants are liars and cheats. The Bet Din must suspect both litigants of being Russia, of being wicked. The Bet Din must consider every claim made by both litigants to be a false claim and demand proof and demand justification for every claim made. Yadun lefi ma sheyira lomed devarim, and the Bet Din will decide the issue based only on the facts, not on the claims made by the litigants. Once the case has been decided, and the litigants are now ready to leave the court because the decision has been issued, now the court should consider both litigants to be kosher. Now the court should view each litigant as being a tzaddik. Now they should relate to both of them as being tzaddikim. Kishekiblu aleim adin, assuming, of course, that they accepted the psak, the decision of the court, yadun kol echad LeChaf zchus, and of course the rule of applying the rule of treating every Jew trustfully, thinking that every Jew is doing things correctly. That applies only after the court has issued its decision. Tov, with this we've surveyed the principal opinions of the sources and opinions of the poskim regarding judging others favorably. Leading up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur over the next few weeks, I want to deal with a number of other issues having to do with ethical, moral standards. And if you have any special questions, if you have any special issues that you wish to discuss in this forum, let me know what topics you want to discuss. Feel free to send me an email. How am I going to give you my email? I know how to do this, I think. No, there has to be chat here somewhere. I know. If I stop sharing. Oh, now I can chat. Here's my email. On chat, you have my email. If you have any topics that you wish to include in this halachic series, feel free to let me know. I'm not willing in this format to talk about Hasidic topics, Kabbalistic topics, Hashkafa topics, as important as they are. This series is going to focus on halachic issues. If you have any halachic topics you want to treat, just let me know, and I'll add them to the series. In any event, I wish you a good week and eventually a Shabbat Shalom, and look forward to seeing you all again next week. At this point, do you have any questions that you wish to ask?
Thank you dearly, Reb Fink.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Unfortunately, for technical reasons, my camera's not on at the moment. I was curious how you approach the idea, LeChaf Zchut, if you have more to say on that.
As far as the halachas are concerned, I've treated the sources. That's it.
Good answer. It sounds like somebody doesn't necessarily even need to have a kippah on their head to be to dan LeChaf Zchut, that they're kasher and and they keep kosher and everything.
Of course, it might be a woman. You're talking about a man. Look, this people. The great rabbis, led by the Hasidic masters, and point out that in avodas Hashem, in serving God, there's tefel and ikar. The main elements, the important elements in service of God, and subsidiary elements which are not as important. Once you figure out which is which, then you have to know what to do with each. Unfortunately, there are many people out there who devote a lot of time and energy to emphasizing things in service of God which are really not very important, and meanwhile they're neglecting things which really are important. They eat their Chalav Yisrael chocolate bar while entertaining themselves in a movie when they really should be doing mitzvahs. But they think that since they have the Chalav Yisrael chocolate bar, they're doing great. There are people who think that if they dress in a certain way, then you don't actually have to do all the mitzvahs correctly. It always disturbs me when I notice behind the shul a number of Jews who are dressed they present themselves in a very frum way, but they really don't have much time or energy to participate in the davening. Well, it's important to distinguish between what's important and what's not important. As far as kippah is concerned, kippah is midat hasidut, a pious practice above and beyond any requirement of halacha, and therefore someone who fails to wear a kippah, a man who does not wear a kippah, is guilty of nothing. It's not an actual sin, and therefore no tshuva is required. The talit katan, on the other hand, really is a mitzvah. and therefore that's really important. Someone who wears a kippah but not a talit, here we have someone who has grasped the pious act of wearing a kippah, which is not insignificant but of relatively minor significance, a pious act, and neglecting a real mitzvah. Well, that's so something went wrong in the decision-making process here. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, that's clear.
Why has kippah wearing? Why has wearing a kippah not attained the status of a minhag, and a minhag that the Jewish people have accepted on themselves? Because it seems to be the case, is it not? Really?
Yeah. It's so embarrassing. One of the rules of our yeshiva is that we teachers are supposed to tell the truth. And therefore, as embarrassing as the truth is, well, here comes, okay, it's not a minhag. The reason it's not a minhag is because there's no such thing as a minhag to do this or to do that. Minhagim are all, without exception, minhagim to refrain from doing this, not to do this, not to do that. Those are minhagim. Not to eat rice on Pesach. That's an Ashkenaz thing, right? Ashkenazim do not eat rice on Pesach. They don't do it. That's shev va'al ta'aseh, refraining from something, not doing something. That can be a minhag. But kum va'aseh, doing something, is not a minhag.
So what status is Mariv?
Mariv is tefillah.
Yeah, but it's in essence voluntary, but men have accepted it as not just voluntary, right?
No. The Gemara says flat out that Mariv is rishus, as you say, optional, and that's all there is to it.
So it remains optional?
Of course. Well, you can't change the halacha in the Gemara, can you? What people mean when they say that Mariv is like a chova, like an obligation, What they mean is something along the following lines. Standing before God, standing in the presence of the Shekhinah, in the divine presence, with your feet together and focusing, you're focusing on the divine presence. That's what Shmona Esrei, the Amidah, the Tefillah is all about. This is something which you are not allowed to do whenever you want, however you want to do it. You are allowed to approach the Shekhinah, the divine presence, reciting the Amidah, reciting the Shmona Esrei, only at times when it is required to do so. And Halacha defines very clearly when it is required to do so. If it's not required to do, it's simply prohibited. If you want to recite an additional optional prayer, Tfilat Reshut, you are not allowed to use the same text of the Shmona Esrei, the Amidah that we have in standard Sidurim. You're absolutely required to do something to change the text, add something to it, because I'm not allowed to use that. When people say that Ma'ariv is like a chova, like an obligation, what they mean is that Chachamenu, the rabbis of the Mishnah and Gemara, permit us to recite an additional tefillah at night.
Oh.
And the tefillah they permit us to recite is the required tefillah, which otherwise you're not allowed to just stand up and say whenever you want.
Mm. And women and shofar?
Women accepting upon themselves mitzvahs aseh shazman grommet. That's nice. That's commendable, but not required. But that's good.
So that also, you can't say that it's become the minhag for women too.
Correct. It's a kum va'aseh. It's something you do, which is commendable, praiseworthy. Rabbis disagree about whether women should say a bracha or not. That's a machlokas poskin. Ashkenaz rabbis say yes. Some Sephardic rabbis say no. But to do the mitzvah is good.
But not a minhag. It's not a minhag.
No.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. Very good distinction to know.
It's great as always. Be well.
Doing something.
Okay. Very good.
Okay, Shkoyach, thank you so much, Fink. Good to see you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Good Shabbos.
Shabbos.